Pierce Brosnan is one of those actors whose entire legacy seems to live inside a single image. The immaculate suit, the controlled half-smile, the perfect hair, the gun held just so, and a martini that might as well be part of his blood type. For a whole generation, he wasn't just someone who played James Bond. He was James Bond, the sleek, polished, 90s version of suave masculinity that existed halfway between old-school charm and MTV Eura cool. But the second you start looking past the tuxedo and actually study his performances with a cold eye, something awkward appears. He's praised like a heavyweight, cast like a brand, and directed like a visual accessory. You end up with an actor who feels overrated in reputation and underrated in how little anyone really let him stretch. Before we dig into why that makes him overrated in a very specific way, hit subscribe, tap that bell icon, and tell me in the comments which cinematic giant you want me to overanalyze next. I'm Director Ammar Hejazi, and today we're dissecting Pierce Brosnan, the once definitive James Bond whose shadow stretches across 90s pop culture, but whose actual acting toolbox might be a lot narrower than the myth that grew around him. A lot of the conversation around Brosnan is built on vibes more than craft. People say things like, he just feels like Bond, he has that old Hollywood charm, he brings class to everything he's in. None of those are about specific acting choices. They're about the aura he projects. That aura is real. He does radiate elegance and control, but when you zoom in on his work moment by moment, the gap between how iconic he looks and how safe he often plays becomes hard to ignore. He's not a fraud and absolutely not talentless, but the mythology around him suggests a depth and range the actual roles rarely require. His main strengths are easy to spot. First, he has genuine screen presence of a classic type. You put Brosnan in a frame, especially in a suit or some tailored coat, and he instantly reads as the center of the world. He knows how to stand, how to turn his head, how to walk through a room like he already knows he belongs there. Second, he has a smooth, polished vocal delivery. His lines are almost always cleanly shaped, slightly musical, with a hint of irony that makes even clunky dialogue feel more sophisticated than it is. Third, he's very good at what you might call tasteful emotion. He can look wounded, disappointed, guilty, or quietly devastated in a way that plays well in mainstream cinema. There's a softness behind the eyes he can turn on fast. The issue is that a lot of his Starface roles stop right at those strengths and never push further. His Bond run is the clearest example. On paper, this version of 007 should have been a perfect opportunity to mix charm, danger, psychological damage, and moral ambiguity. In practice, the Brosnan Bond is mostly an exercise in surface, the right look, the right quip, the right pose after an explosion. He handles the physicality, he handles the flirting, he handles the one-liners. But how often do you genuinely feel like you're watching a deeply conflicted, morally exhausted assassin whose soul is rotting under the tux? The films occasionally gesture toward that darkness, but they rarely live in it, and Brosnan almost never drags the character somewhere uncomfortable against the film's will. Most of the time, he remains controlled, composed, and emotionally legible in neat, safe lines. You see the same pattern when you step outside Bond and look at how his type gets recycled. Put him in a romantic drama and he's the charming man with a secret or with past mistakes, playing guilt like a light shadow over the same elegant baseline. Put him in a thriller and he becomes the suave manipulator or morally ambiguous businessman with the same posture and voice, just a slightly colder gaze. Put him in a family or ensemble film and he slides into the handsome older presence who brings a bit of class and emotional steadiness. The tempo, the body language, the vocal rhythm, they all stay relatively similar. He doesn't vanish into characters. Characters are adjusted to look good on Pierce Brosnan. From an acting craft standpoint, it helps to separate technique from transformation. Technically, he's solid. He knows where the camera is. He understands how to cheat his face toward the lens without making it obvious. His line delivery is controlled and rarely sloppy. He can modulate volume and tone enough to suggest authority, seduction, or mild vulnerability. His reactions are clean and easy to read. That's the work of a skilled professional who understands the mechanics of being photographed. Transformation, however, is where the overrated conversation really kicks in. Transformation is about fundamentally changing how you move, think, and feel on screen from role to role, altering rhythm, posture, energy, even your sense of humor. With Brosnan, the degree of transformation is usually pretty low. You almost always feel like you're watching Pierce Brosnan plus or minus some facial hair, plus or minus a moral compass, plus or minus 10% emotional intensity. The base template stays intact, refined, controlled, lightly ironic, and aesthetically composed. What makes this more frustrating is that there are glimpses of something more interesting buried under the polish. Every now and then, in darker or stranger projects, you see flashes where he lets the mask slip a moment of brittle anger, a look of genuine desperation, a line delivered with less control and more crack in the voice. In those isolated beats, you get the sense that there's an actor inside who might be capable of real messiness. But almost immediately, either the script or the direction seems to pull everything back towards smooth, watchable, contained. His performances snap back to elegance the way a rubber band snaps back to its first shape. This creates a paradox that really defines how you read his career. On one side, he's overrated as a supposedly deep and versatile actor whose every role is layered and complex. His reputation among casual viewers often puts him in the same mental drawer as genuinely transformational performers, just because he once wore an iconic costume. On the other side, he's underrated in the sense that he's rarely given writing that truly trusts him to break his own image. The industry seems addicted to using him as a symbol of class, nostalgia, and suave masculinity, instead of as a tool for real character experimentation. He ends up being treated more like a visual motif than a full instrument. Need your movie to feel instantly more sophisticated? Cast Brosnan. Want to signal old-school charm with a hint of sadness? Cast Brosnan. Want an antagonist who isn't physically threatening but feels socially powerful and cultured? Cast Brosnan. In all of these cases, his presence does a lot of atmospheric work. He can elevate mediocre material by simply being there and delivering lines with more poise than the script deserves. That's a real value, but it is very different from being a fearless, range-heavy actor. If you compare him to other actors with strong suit and charm branding, the gap becomes clearer. Someone like Daniel Craig, in his Bond era, gradually pushed the character into more physically and emotionally broken territory. You see anger, grief, self-disgust, and a sense of aging that actually alters how he moves. Someone like Mads Mikkelsen, even when he's playing a sophisticated villain, injects little bits of weirdness and vulnerability that make each character feel distinct. Brosnan tends to stay in a narrower band, slightly amused, slightly wounded, slightly dangerous, but always composed. He doesn't often risk looking ridiculous, grotesque, or truly powerless in a way that would shatter the smoothness of his image. None of this means his career is a failure. In fact, in a different light, it's weirdly successful. He figured out how to be a specific kind of cinematic tool, and he's been used for decades because that tool works. The frustration comes from the mismatch between the mythology and the evidence. People talk about him like he's a titan of complex acting when his actual strength is a very well-crafted persona that studios kept copy-pasting. The tragedy, if there is one, is that he might have earned the heavyweight status people casually give him if more filmmakers had been willing to strip away his comfort zone, dehuglamorize him, and let him look truly small, broken, or strange. So is Pierce Brosnan overrated? If you're talking about him as one of the major actors of his generation in terms of range, risk, and psychological depth, then yes, he is. The reverence often comes more from nostalgia for his Bond era and his overall image than from a close reading of his performances. But as a cinematic ingredient, the elegant, slightly haunted, highly watchable presence who can instantly raise the temperature of a scene, he's genuinely valuable and, in some ways, underused. The irony is that the same industry that overpraises his persona never really let the actor underneath it fully show what he could do. If you're into this kind of breakdown, part roast, part film school analysis, hit like, drop a comment with your favorite or most overrated Pierce Brosnan performance, and tell me who you want me to go after next. Do we stay in the Bond family and dissect Daniel Craig? Or jump sideways to someone like Keanu Reeves or Tom Cruise? You decide. I'm Ammar Hejazi, and I'll see you in the next one.